Okay, so UGREEN have launched a brand new 4-bay NAS. This is the DXP4800 Pro, a new slightly scaled up version of the previous 4-bay NAS. This is not apparently replacing the existing DXP4800 Plus. This is a slightly refreshed model. It's got a couple of tweaks to the hardware profile there. In today's video, we are going to be reviewing this as a full NAS solution, not just a slight tweak version, predominantly because when I originally reviewed the DXP4800 Plus, it was right the way back during their crowdfunding campaign. And the time that has passed has been almost 2 years since this was originally shown here on the channel. And I want to review this new model as a standalone solution. I want to look at it as a new NAS solution from an established player in the market, no longer looking at it as a crowdfunding solution, and ultimately whether this thing not only deserves the small price increase that has been noticed at launch, but also whether it deserves your data as an actual 2026 NAS solution. So straight out the gate, this is knocking out around $699. There's almost certainly going to be a day one launch special offer. They always seem to do that at UGREEN. It knocks out with 10 GBE on the rear alongside a 2.5 gigabit network port there on the rear. It's also got a bunch of 10 gig USB-Cs in USB Type A and Type C. It's got an SD card slot built there into the front. It's got 4 SATA drives, 2 M.2 NVMe bays. It's running on an Intel i3 processor and arrives with 8 gig of DDR5 SODIMM memory. So what has changed between the Pro Series and that Plus Series model? Well, realistically, it's just the CPU, and of course that has had a knock-on effect in other areas of the system. The Plus Series arrives with an Intel Pentium 8505, 5-core 6-thread processor there, and this new model arrives with an Intel i3 processor. It's a 13th generation 6-core 8-thread processor. It increases the clock speed a little bit there. It increases the integrated graphics capability. It also increases marginally the larger supported memory transfer speed and the maximum capacity memory scaling up from 64 gig up to 96 gig there. So again, it's about what that slightly later release CPU, I think it's like a year difference, brings to the fold in terms of scalability for the hardware. So that's really where your $100 or so spend difference goes. Because if you go for the Plus Series model, not only is that around $550 to $600, but also it's more widely available in the market. It's largely established, and like any solution that's been in the market for a while, there are deals to be had. So again, that price difference of a little over $100 is really focusing on that processor more than anything else. Now, the design of this is pretty much largely identical to that of the Plus Series model, although I will highlight the material feels slightly different to that of the Plus Series model. You can't really tell in a good light, but you can sort of feel the difference there. Not cheaper, not worse, it's just a different material overall. It's still metal all the way through. We'll get to noise and temps later on. It arrives with 4 SATA bays there on the front. Each one is key lockable with the keys included with the system. And those 4 SATA bays feed into a backplane there and a controller there out the back, an AS Media 1164 SATA controller that's on a Gen 3 x2 lane there. So 2 gigabytes per second transfer speed there to play with. Also, on the base of the system, we've got those M.2s. There's a little panel there built in that's got 2 screws in place. Removing those 2 screws reveals to us not only a couple of M.2s, but also 2 SODIMM memory slots. Again, this doesn't support ECC. And on top of that, the M.2 bays inside there, they are Gen 4 x4 speed each. Using the system's internal benchmarking tool, I was able to hit 5.5 to 6 gigabytes per second comfortably using their own benchmark tools. And I will say in terms of cooling, much like the predecessor, the room inside there is a space above each of the M.2 NVMe bays for the large, very, very thick thermal pad that arrives in the accessory kit to immediately and directly attach itself to that metal base panel there for dissipation. The feet on this system are pretty darn low though, I will say. So the elevation of this system from a desk or table isn't that high, so I do wonder about the dissipation. Again, we'll get onto the temps later on. But in terms of cooling, not only have we got a single rear big old fan that you can control, but a mesh filter panel that can be removed and attached via magnetism. But before we crack on, let's talk about performance of all of that storage media. First, we'll zone in on those hard drive bays there using Atto on a 1 GB test file there over 10 GBE connection on a Samba mapped network drive and 4 Seagate 4TB drives. I saw performance there, give or take, of around 450 to 500 megabytes per second read and write around 300 to 350. And that was 4 of those rather modest hard drives in a RAID 5 environment there. Those are drives that even individually max would hit 180 megabytes. So you would look at an increase of around 30 to 50, 60 on a good day megabytes per second for each drive. So the numbers are pretty respectable. Now, earlier on I mentioned when I used the internal benchmark tools for the M.2 bays, I was able to hit 5.5 to 6 gigabytes per second. However, what about in real world testing? What I did was set up the same Samba connection to the 10 gig connection, but this time I mounted the M.2 NVMe, 2 of them 1TBs, in a RAID 0 environment, 2 of them being Gen 4 SSDs. In a RAID 0 environment together, I then transferred over 51.5 gigabytes of data, and as follows, we can see that it took around 79 seconds to transfer that, and that was 21 media files. So again, no small files, all big chunky data there, all being transferred over. So it's around about 660 to 680 megabytes per second, whether you're looking at the data as the calculations of a gigabyte and a terabyte, etc. But overall, pretty respectable numbers for sustained performance of the M.2s over that 10 gig. I didn't really expect them to peak and continuously hit 1 gigabyte per second for a Windows Samba transfer with media files. Still pretty darn good from what I'm seeing there. Not out of this world, but not terrible either. And continuing on the subject of the M.2s, I also set up an SSH connection onto this system and did repeated 1 gigabyte file tests. Now, I mentioned earlier on there are 2 M.2 bays inside there. That's not strictly true. There's actually 3, because one of them in there that this arrives with is, I believe, 128 gig in scale, and that is what the operating system lives on for this system. So if you do want to choose to use your TrueNAS, your Unray, Open Media Vault, and more, you can go ahead and install that on here, and it won't invalidate your hardware warranty. So you can use the drive they've included. It runs on a Gen 3x4 lane, so you've still got the 2 4x4 M.2s as well. So via SSH on that operating system drive on 3x4, I did repeated 1 gigabyte tests there, and I saw a performance of 3.1 gigabytes per second read and 2.4 gigabytes per second write. So again, we've got 3 M.2s there, and you don't have to use their OS if you don't want to. But the Gen 4x4 base there, we already mentioned 5.5 to 6 gigabytes per second synthetic tests in their own OS. What about an SSH transfer test? Well, 1 gigabyte again read and write. We saw 4.8 gigabytes per second read and 4.3 gigabytes per second write. Again, in SSH, and the way it's conducted there within the OS, that's still not too shabby. It would have been nice to see them maybe pip 5 gigabytes, but again, not terrible numbers overall. When I tried to transfer data between each of the Gen 4 SSD slot inside, so that was transferring from bay 2 to bay 3 of the M.2, ignoring the OS drive there, I saw performance only as high as 1.6 gigabytes on that repeated 1 gigabyte file transfer between the Gen 4 SSDs. That was definitely less than I was hoping for. So there is definitely some sort of transfer there going through perhaps the main OS there and therefore the OS drive on 3x4, but still the transfer between them, that's more than respectable, especially when you realise the external is capped at 10 gigabits per second. Next up, power consumption. This is definitely going to be an area for some of you where when you're looking at Intel Twin Lake, Alder Lake and these lovely efficient systems that run on sub 10 watt, this is going to seem rather aggressive. To put that into perspective, remember I've got 4 4TB Seagate Iron Wolf drives inside there, and alongside that is a single 10 gig connection and a 2.5 gig connection with this system. The following were my power readings. Now with the system at sub 5% power CPU utilization, all of the multimedia in idle, and the 10 gig and the 2.5 gig ports connected but not accessed, I saw an idle power consumption of 28 watts. So again, much higher than some of those Intel Alder Lake, Twin Lake modest systems we talked about, but still not the end of the world. However, once the CPU was hitting around 15% utilization, with the hard drives active, although the SSDs weren't, and the 10 gig and the 2.5 gig connections in place, I saw the power consumption jump up to 58 to 59 watts. Keep in mind, each of those drives is going to be utilizing around 3 to 5 watts each. We have to factor that in, but still, this is quite a markup. For 4-bay hard drive system, it's a little higher than some of the options in the market where you might see late 30s, early 40s in terms of watts per consumption. Now, with the CPU, when I got that to a 100% or 95 to 100% while doing huge amounts of indexing and transcoding, I got the CPU to pretty much maximum, all the hard drives and all the SSD being accessed simultaneously, and the 2.5 gig and 10 gig connection. I saw about a consumption of 83 to 84 watts. That's pretty bloody high. Now, you're probably not going to be utilizing this system to those peaks all the time, but just keep that in mind that with a more aggressive CPU there, even though it does have a flexible TDP, you do have the potential to ramp up the power consumption a lot. But what about the old racket? What about the noise? How about this system? I had 4 different operational environments to test the noise. So the first one was when I had the fans, which you can adjust, by the way, to automatic or manual, set to auto, and that means they're adjusting as needed, with the whole system in idle, no hard drives in utilization, and more. That was with the system all up and running. I saw the dBA sit around 32 to 34. Pretty low for a 4-bay hard drive system, especially when it's metal. Now, after that, I went ahead and went with the fan set to their lowest setting, the quietest setting there, with the M2s being accessed. Because let's face it, if you've got the fans low and you're accessing some hot old SSDs, I want to see what happens. I'm pleased to say, though, the fan was still pretty low and the overall noise sat around 33 to 34 once again. So pretty much largely the same as idle. Next up, I set the fans to auto mode again, but this time hitting the hard drives with access read and write. At that point, the noise of the hard drives was louder than the fans, notably, and that was at 43 to 46 dBA. Now, to put that into perspective, I then moved over with the hard drives being left idle, but the fans set to their highest mode, their cooling mode, and I saw the noise hit possibly its highest level at around 46 to 49. It was a bit variable there, but overall the fans, when they are on their highest and when they are needed, this thing can get real noisy. Let's listen to those in isolation. Next up, I had the system up and running for that 24-hour period with intermittent access every single 30 minutes. After that, I checked the temps the following day. Now, the front of the system had around 39 degrees reported, the sides of the system around 34 to 35, and the top of the system at around 33 to 34. Remember, metal dissipating that heat. The front of the system, as you can see, was sat around 41 to 42 with the ports at the bottom, and around the front bays on the front panel, it was around 40, but the drives, as you can see, between each of the individual bays is around 42 to 43 degrees. Now, at the top of the system, the rear of the system, around the fan area, even with the fan panel removed, was only around 38 degrees, and the ports and connections at the base around 36 to 38 degrees as well. So not too shabby, particularly that 10 gig connection, by the way. But the base of the system was what I was the most interested in, remember, because the SSDs are directly attached via the thermal pad to the base panel. And from there, the raise from the table was quite low. Luckily, I'm pleased to say it was only around 34 to 35 degrees. It was clearly the hotter, but again, you've got to take that into relativity against the rest. Again, this was only a 24-hour period, but still, nonetheless, I'm quite happy with those thermals. Next up, multimedia and Jellyfin. We installed Jellyfin utilising the app in the App Centre there, and then I went ahead and tested some 4K and 8K media. So straight away, number one, I went ahead with a 4K HEVC heavy file, and from there used hardware transcoding to see what would happen. I monitored the GPU, aka the graphical quick sync integrated graphics, iGPU, call it what you will, element of that CPU, and only saw utilisation of around 6 to 7%. After that, I scaled it up to an 8K file, went ahead with hardware transcoding, and the GPU rate in there on the resource manager only sat around 8 to 12%. So again, very respectable numbers. Then I went ahead with some bulk media. So I went ahead and played 5 individual 8K multimedia files, each of them dense, but with no transcoding. It was just native playback. And we saw the GPU-CPU combo there set around 10 to 15%. Finally, I went ahead and transcoded for different varying levels of transcoding and different 8K files, 5 8K transcoding operations, and at that point I saw CPU utilization of around 15 to 20%. So overall, decent enough stats all the way around. And as an upgrade from the Plus series, we are getting a little bit more horsepower under the bonnet to take advantage of. So what about the software? I can tell you right now, the additional hardware under the bonnet does very little to change what the software can present to you rather than the Plus series model. But let's dig into the software just a fraction. Now, I'm going to say it straight out the gate. It may annoy some of you that I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on the software. I'm going to go through some of the highlights and the lowlights, but mainly I'm not going to go through it because, frankly, on the channel, I've already covered this subject a lot and in greater detail, from breaking down the individual software and how it compares against some of its competitors, some of the features, how things change from unit to unit ever since the initial crowdfunding of the original UGREEN series. But ultimately, what I'm saying is, if you do want to read up about the software, there's a whole bunch of videos linked below, right the way down to that great setup guide I worked on, he said arrogantly. But the software can be accessed either via the web browser, via the mobile application, or the desktop client tool. I'm going to switch over the desktop client, but pretty much everything you're seeing here can be conducted from the browser-based access via the IP. You can also use this application when you install it for the first time for PC or Mac, again, or Android, to scan your local area network and find the device. Security is managed pretty easily from the user interface panel up here, where you can set up your password. You can change the rules of passwords and making them a great deal more, secure with different character limits, refresh of the passwords over time, as well as enabling two-factor authentication with your OTP or 2FA, MFA service of choice. Most of them are supported. You can go on there and then install them and set it up straight out the gate. On top of that, via the control panel as mentioned in the security settings, you can set up auto block rules. You can set up what happens if certain IPs come in and then blacklist them over time and whitelist them, of course, and enabling different levels of access to different users by creating individual user groups and setting up individual users on the fly. And all of those password rules, those two-factor authentication rules, they can all be managed pretty easily as well. And that extends, by the way, to individual file services for accessing the device via your remote access means of choice, as well as setting up between them how devices are accessing. Are you going to be using remote access, using their own relay service, or taking advantage of just standard local area network access? And again, that breaks down, if you go into the file manager, for changing low and high level access to individual folders on the fly for different users, giving permission to different apps and services is all really straightforward. Storage management and backup management is conducted over a multitude of different applications of choice. Straight away within the storage manager, you can set up your different RAID configurations. You can take advantage of M.2 and NVMe storage pools or use them for SSD caching, read, write and write caching. You can manage external storage connected via USB drives there, and you can manage your storage pools as well as your volumes. And again, you've got the advantage of the multiple different storage RAID configurations, or you can go down for your volume choices from ext4 into BTRFS. BTRFS, of course, allows us to take advantage of snapshots very, very easily, and also with much lower system impact. Set them up on a schedule, set up policies for how long you keep those retained snapshots, and set them up on the fly very easily. You can break it down into individual user folders, but you will need to use BTRFS. Talking of versions and restoration, if you are using the client application, the File Explorer here gives you an additional option next to file storage access by breaking down into versions of files. So if with different folders being supported, if you add versioning to a different folder, you can revert a file to its original settings easily. And again, within the settings menu, you can sort of choose which shared folders you want to grant access for this to, the number of versions that are retained over time, and therefore if a file is changed within those shared folders, you can revert them to a previous iteration if you choose, but you need to use the client tool in order to take advantage of that. For backups and synchronization, you have a few options open to you. Again, we've talked about it before, that the fact they've added iSCSI support will allow you to natively attach storage rather than using just SMB or Samba, you can create locally appearing storage on your operating system of choice, such as Windows, utilizing storage areas connected. And again, iSCSI and SAN management, so targets and LUNs is a little complicated, but you photo video editors or those that experiment with virtual machines will probably welcome that inclusion. Now, we talked there about backups and storage. We've got the synchronization option here, allowing us to synchronize areas of storage between my local computer using the client app and the UGREEN NAS, or another UGREEN NAS into the UGREEN NAS. Or you can go ahead and create backup tasks between the NAS and the computer, the NAS and another storage system, be it UGREEN or other. And you can even create a storage area from within the UGREEN NAS itself, where you can set up storage and synchronization options between different areas of the NAS internally as well as externally. Again, a little bit of flexibility there, quite nice to see. And you can set up rules for file types, file sizes, file age, and different filtering processes to make it all the easier. That said, a continued weakness in the UGREEN NAS operating system that I will continue to highlight is the security manager, which really does seem, in my opinion, to double down and focus way too much on viruses. It focuses way too much on malware, and although that is very, very important, UGREEN has still yet to introduce a scanning system that will scan the system for things like weak passwords, for apps having a little bit too much access, SSH being left open. Lots of little bells and whistles that I really do think are missing in this scanner, which are available from other options in the market. They're doing such a great job on this software in the evolution they've made over the last 18 to 24 months that I really want to see them hit that. One area they do hit that well, I would say, is multimedia, because there is a good bevy of multimedia applications. So if you want to take advantage of photos and AI photo recognition, you've got that option there for a shared library, a personal library, and these albums can be extended to people where you can attach facial recognition. So in this case, I can just add my name and then boom, every time I upload photos of me into here, it will tag those photos for me, and that extends to ripping and crawling the information that's located on the image metadata. So again, things like access to the metadata for geolocational stuff on phone apps, you can do that. Same thing goes beyond geolocational data for object recognition. So you can see photos have been able to recognize certain elements there quite easily within the photos. Those aren't based in the names, they are based into the images themselves. And you can manage a lot of that by going into the settings menu up here and choosing which AI assisted edge models do you want to take advantage of, or disable them or restrict them to certain folders. It's that straightforward. You can even create your own customized individual learning tools by adding a multitude of your own images to create a recognized database there with the Edge AI. You don't have to use it, but it's nice to have the option there. Beyond that, you can make your way into audio with audio indexing there with files and folders on the NAS that you can crawl and then scrape that metadata to create albums for streaming over UPnP and DLNA on supported hardware devices. For video, you've got Theatre taking advantage of the HDMI output. Again, these can be output via a mobile application and managed via the UGREEN and mobile app to output over HDMI and control files on the fly in a parallel sense alongside what you're already watching. And a lot of the metadata for images on thumbnails and more is scraped from the movie database that you can attach with an API key. Alternatively, just install Jellyfin. It's a one app installation via the App Center there, allowing you to utilize that with everything from hardware transcoding and more. There still isn't a Plex app available, but at least they've got Jellyfin. It's a start, but there's more to be done. Ultimately, as mentioned, I've covered this in a lot more detail in other videos. Everything from take advantage of containerization via Docker to the introduction more recently of things like virtualization with their own virtual machine application. It's all built in here for you to take advantage of the hardware here at your disposal. Again, go through the other videos that I've covered here in the channel for the good, the bad, what works, what doesn't, but ultimately, the software running on the Pro is still pretty darn good. There's a ways to go, but they're making a very established platform for themselves over This UGREEN Pro Series 4 Bay feels like a mid-series refresh of an existing range. Let me explain. A lot of the NAS brands that I talk about here on the channel, when they have a series that roll out every few years, sometimes certain components aren't available, the CPU, the network controller and more. And then they release a modified version of the existing series and sometimes add a 2 on the end or a V2 on the end, or lots of little things that are effectively saying it's the same box with a slight tweak, and then they retire the old series. UGREEN, on the other hand, are seemingly leaving both of these available and are currently in stock right now. They're not just replacing this and phasing it out with this. Now, that might change in 12 months, but still, it's nice to have that option where, you know, $100 more gets you a better CPU. But it's not a significantly different proposition. If you already own this, there is no reason to go for this. If you're considering this device right here, if you see this on offer, or if it does go out on one of them launch day promos, I don't know if they're doing that. They supplied this. This isn't a sponsored video, by the way. They've supplied the hardware. They're seeing it at the same time as you are. This is a good proposition alternative to this for that price difference in 2026, when this device is 1.5 years old in terms of commercial availability at this point, except if you're in Australia, apparently. This Pro is a good box, but it's not a huge jump up from what's already currently available, and you should only buy it if you just want a little bit more future-proofing at this time. In terms of delivery on your data, you're not really going to feel the difference unless you're at peak. Plus, at that price point, this starts to knock on the door of the UGREEN 6 Bay, and you go down that road, you end up with a 10-core i5, you end up with Thunderbolt connectivity there and dual 10 gig connections. So again, where this sits in that portfolio, it's going to be interesting to see a year from now if they continue to maintain this one. Ultimately, it's still a good solution from a brand that is still continuing to make real aggressive moves into the turnkey NAS market. There's still gaps, there's still things they need to do. They need a better security scanner. They need to have Plex as a one-click installing app. They need to optimize some of that performance to meet and be in line with other options in the market right now. But for the price point, the availability, and just general usability, this system, like a lot of the other UGREENs right now, is still a fantastic option for those moving away from the cloud or small photo video editing suites that need a good, robust, standalone set up and forget solution. And if the current market leaders in NAS are not really doing it for you, or certain things they've done, hard drive compatibility, have been bothering you, I can see why brands like this are really cleaning up. But let me know what you think. Now, this video is supported by affiliated links. I'm sorry, but that's just the case. There, of course, is Google Ads built into YouTube, but they don't really make that much bunts, trust me. So if you have found this video helpful, and if you're going to go to the stores listed in the description below, and if you want to support what we do, make sure those 3 things are true, then please use those links in order to get a hold of any of the devices I've talked about today or in any other video. It costs you nothing extra, and we get a small commission on anything you buy that allows us, me and Eddie here at NAS Compares, it's just us, to keep doing what we do, the reviews, the guides, the support, the forums, all of that stuff. So please help us out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. Written review coming up on this soon, and a few comparisons too, and I'll see you next time.